and welcome to today's webinar, Enhancing Your Storytelling. Most people know that storytelling is a valuable tool within public speaking. It's an important tool in the art of influence, persuasion, and it helps people remember what you've said. So I'm going to share with you today some tips to just enhance your storytelling, some ideas and concepts that you can weave in to your storytelling. I've run another webinar on how to structure and how to prepare your story. This is just some tips to help you enhance your storytelling. Allow me to share my screen. So, Peter Dhu is my name, public speaking trainer and coach, and my passion is helping you find your voice so you can share your messages, your ideas, make a difference to your community, your clients, to your team. Enhance your storytelling. As always, feel free to ask questions as we go. I will keep an eye out on the chat box if you have anything you want to comment on. Ask questions as we go. Take notes, bearing in mind this webinar is recorded for your review at any time later. And send me an email afterwards. And more importantly, with every webinar I do, I ask you to think about how might I apply this to my own journey, to your journey. Think of your presentations in the past. Is there anything you would have done differently to enhance your storytelling, to enhance your presentation? Or moving forward, is there something you're going to include or delete to take your presentation to the next level? So think about the stuff and how it applies to you rather than just listen and say, oh, that's nice. It's the application of one or two ideas that's going to make a difference to you, and that's what matters to me, making a difference in your public speaking. So, introduction to effective storytelling. So why is it so important? And why do we craft our stories? Why do we polish our stories? Why do we need to become good storytellers whenever we're presenting, training, educating, even facilitating? And this is the seminal data that I refer to all the time. It comes from Stanford University. If you talk to people, if you tell people information, if you just give them facts, 10% of people will recall, will retain the information you've shared with them. Another way of looking at it is 90% of people are going to forget what you've told them. Now, if you talk to people and you include visual aids, so you've got your PowerPoint presentation, you're seeing me on the screen, I give you a few handouts or a book to share. Maybe I go to the whiteboard and I draw a model. So I'm throwing in a visual cue. I'm tripling your retention rate to 30%. Flip side, 70% of people still do not remember, recall what you've spoken about. Now, if you throw in a story that creates an emotional, that visceral, that gut response, people remember. It increases your retention rate to 75%. And there's that saying that I'm sure you're familiar with, people don't remember what you've said, they remember how they make you feel. So the purpose of storytelling is to create that visceral response in your audience, that light at the end of the tunnel, that I've got this. So that's why we tell stories. All right, some tips to help with your storytelling. Very important. If it doesn't add to your story, by definition, it takes away from your story. And it's really important that you craft your story and you adjust your story to have relevance for that audience. Different audiences have different relevances, different folks, different strokes. So who am I speaking to? Which story is going to resonate best with that audience that's going to illustrate my key point? Example, I often talk about Ringo Starr and Ringo Starr's stage fright, his performance anxiety, his fear when he goes on stage. Not all my audiences know who Ringo Starr is. So if I start talking about Ringo Starr and people glaze over, my story is not going to resonate. So I need to make sure I've got a story for that particular audience. With storytelling, it's often not what to put in that matters, it's what to take out. The more you take out, often the better the story becomes. So it's identifying and eliminating unnecessary details. With the Ringo Starr story, so Ringo Starr is one of the Beatles, by the way, I have a way of bringing it down to a more common denominator. And those people who say, I haven't heard of Ringo Starr, I ask, have you heard of Thomas the Tank Engine? And of course, everybody nods. All the younger people nod. They know of, have heard, grew up with Thomas the Tank Engine. And Ringo Starr is the voice of the original Thomas the Tank Engine. And then they start to nod. So with your storytelling, if it doesn't add to what you're saying, then it detracts from what you're saying. The level of detail, the dates, Monday, Tuesday, or was it Wednesday, often doesn't matter. The second thing that's really important that I train in my workshops is don't retell your story, rather relive the story. And it's the vivid recollection, it's the emotional state that you transport yourself to. Now, you do that within a safe space for yourself. One of the things we do not do with storytelling, one of the things we do not do on stage is we do not do therapy. So if we recall a story that takes us to a place where we are unsafe, then we need to disconnect from that story just a little bit. And I often coach people who need to do a eulogy at a family member's funeral, and they're telling stories, and then you can see them crumble and fall to bits as they tell that story. So we need to structure that story and become less emotionally connected. But generally, when you do public speaking and you share a story, you need to become emotionally connected. And we say relive the story rather than retell the story. I was coaching someone the other day, and they're talking about the excitement they've got for the coming year, for financial year 2025. And they were very unexcited as they spoke about their excitement. And I said, are you really excited? They said, well, yes, I am. And I said, but it's not coming through in your presentation. What's something really exciting that happened to you that created that excitement recently? And his response was, well, I got married about 6 months ago and it was an absolutely brilliant wedding and I absolutely loved it. And he smiled and his eyes popped and you could see the excitement as he recalled the wedding. And I said, so as you talk about the excitement of the financial year 2025 coming forward, just reconnect with that emotional state that you had at your wedding. And that'll bring about the smile and the level of energy that you need to let your audience, your team members know that you as the manager are really excited about year 2025. So the emotions are real. They connect you to the story. So less about retelling and more about reliving in a safe space. Just another general rule of storytelling: the recent stories have greater impact than ancient stories. So what life experience has happened recently to illustrate the point that you're making that you can use, as opposed to a story that happened 10, 15, 20 years ago? So recent events connect people to, they connect the audience closer to you, something that they're aware of, something that happened in the news, something that you can relate to the news, the current affairs of the environment at the time. So I look for stories all the time. And one of the things I do with stories is I have a journal. And when something happens, I write it down. You never know when you're going to use it. And I call this my bank of stories, my bank of stories. I collect them everywhere. And the more recent story is stronger than a story that happened many, many years ago. So just a general rule: look for stories all the time. Don't think you've got your stories collected. You've got them anchored, and I'm going to use that, and that's the end of my work. No, stories are everywhere. They're our everyday experiences, the adversity, the triumphs, the navigating difficult situations, and keep them current as best you can. With storytelling, it's really good if you can take people on a sensory journey as well, and engage all the senses where possible. I love the smell of a good massaman curry. I went to Thailand recently, and massaman curry, that yellow curry, is one of my favorite curries. It's got the coconut milk, the galangal, and the aromas coming out of a pot of galangal, of massaman curry, make me water, make me salivate, my mouth water just to think about it. The silence, where you can hear the sound of a pin dropping. You can hear your heartbeat. The view of the most magnificent sunset across the Pilbara, the red outback of Western Australia. As soon as I was there, I knew that the Pilbara was the place where I wanted to walk, where I wanted to work. Use your senses. And the other one you can use is use people's imagination. So imagine, and some of the great speeches, Martin Luther King, imagine a world, where everyone is equal. I have a vision, I have a view, I have a dream. That's trapping into people's imaginations. What would you do if you were in this situation? How would you handle it? So take people on that imaginary journey as well in your storytelling, as well as engaging the different senses. Conflict. Most storytelling revolves around a conflict. There's a villain, there's a problem, and there's a hero. And this is the 3-act structure. It's not mine. You can Google storytelling, and you set the scene up, what's happening, what the challenges are. And then there's a confrontation, there's some resistance, there's some conflict, there's a villain. And then the 3rd act is the resolution, the solution, the climax, the way forward, so that people walk out with the belief in their gut that they've got this, that they can see the light at the end of the tunnel. So weave some conflict into your story. Some psychologists call it cognitive dissonance. And sometimes it makes the hair stand up on the back of your neck. What conflict can you put into your story that you're going to overcome or come through? What is the problem and how does that relate to people in the room? One of the storytelling models that people use is problem, cause, and solution. And it is, of course, a 3-act story as well. Now, contrary to what I said, recent stories trump stories long in the past. Most of us have that signature story, and that one lasts and lasts and lasts. You probably only ever climb Mount Everest once. You probably only ever survive a disaster once. So that's that signature story. But you still need to keep it fresh and keep honing it. And as the story gets a little bit older, what can you leave out? What can you delete to make it a short story that pops and grabs people's attentions and carries your core message of success despite adversity, overcoming that villain, that conflict? My seminal story is that I am a person who stutters. And for 15 years of my life, I was an elective mute from age 15 to 25. But I still stutter. So that seminal story is organic. And there's things that happen to me today as a result of my stutter. And I can keep that seminal story fresh. So develop your signature story, the one that you're known for, that defines your personal brand, and polish it and keep it current. And those seminal stories will age over time. Another tip for storytelling is, can you engage the audience? Can you make it interactive? Do a little bit of Q&A. What would you do in that? So just imagine you're in this. This is where I found myself, age 55, about to retire and not having enough superannuation. By asking questions and getting people to interact, you're also engaging. And depending on the forum, you can open the floor for people's participation. With a big group, I'll ask people to share with the person next to them, because if I ask a group of 100 people for someone to share, it could be that that person takes us off track and down a bit of a rabbit hole. Whereas turn to the person next to you, have a chat. How would you deal with this situation? Come up with 3 strategies moving forward. Then when they've had that discussion, you've engaged them, then you can come back and finish your story. So you don't have to tell your story complete. You can park it for a while, get the people to do something, and then come back and continue the story. The story doesn't necessarily have to be linear either. You don't have to start from the beginning and finish to the end. You can start somewhere else and then go back. And you see that in movies. Sometimes there's retrospectives. Sometimes there's time jumps. When you interact with your audience, you get more engagement as well. The risk I see with people telling stories is they've got wonderful life stories and they go into a very long emotional monologue. And people say, wow, you're an amazing person. And they walk out, but they don't have anything for themselves. So the Q&A gets people in their head. How would you deal with this? What would you do in this situation? All right. They are some of my tips to weave into your storytelling style. So why do we tell stories? To help people remember. If it doesn't add to your story, it probably takes away. Don't retell, try and relive, tap into that emotional. Recent stories tend to trump old and ancient stories. Use all the senses and the imagination of your audience. Conflict. friction, dissension, and then resolution in your storytelling. And that signature story, polish it, try and keep it fresh. It may have happened 10 years ago, 15 years ago, but what's recently in your life that links back to that story that brings that currency? And don't be afraid to involve the audience with Q&A. What would you do in that situation? Turn to the person next to you. I'm going to give you 3 minutes to have that chat. Upcoming webinars. How to start strong. This is the compelling introduction. We also call it a hook. Rather than good morning, everyone. My name's Peter Dhu. It's a real pleasure to be here today. Can I get you to turn your mobile phones off? What are you going to say to create that impact that everyone in the room sits up and says, I need to listen? Friday the 2nd of August, 8:30 to 9. And some skills for impromptu speaking. So thinking on your feet, and someone asks you a question or asks you to comment, or how would you deal with that? And you're on, no time to prepare, and you expect to speak and make sense. 24th of September. They are my upcoming webinars. You know how to reach me. If I can be of any assistance to you, send me an email, pick up the phone, give me a call. I've got some resources on my website. So this is Peter Dhu, public speaking trainer and coach, thanking you for participation. And remember, storytelling really matters. It's how people remember what you've said. Which of those 2 or 3 tips, which 2 or 3 tips from today's webinar can you use to elevate, to enhance, to polish your storytelling ability? Bye for now.